The cruel persecution of the Jewish people became one of the darkest, most tragic chapters of the Second World War. Whole neighborhoods were turned into open-air prisons, the ghettos along with concentration camps where a human life was worth nothing. Finally, there was the systematic, cold-blooded genocide, the annihilation of an entire people. These events are forever seared into the memory of humanity. But amid the terror and the pain, one incredibly important key question remains: why? Why did Hitler hate the Jews so much? How did this all-consuming hatred manage to spread so quickly, so devastatingly, across Europe, like a plague? Today, we will delve into this complex and frightening subject. We will try to explore the true origins of this anti-Semitism, to understand how it was born, how it grew, and how it ultimately led to one of the greatest crimes against humanity. And stay with us until the very end, because Hitler's devilish plan to exterminate the Jews had one consequence that he probably never could have imagined. This consequence changed the course of history and continues to affect our world to this day. Before we begin our journey into the past, we have a goal of 1 million subscribers. It seems like a lot, but with your help, with your participation, we can reach that number. Subscribe right now, give a like if you find this topic interesting, and become a part of our story, a part of this important conversation. So, the roots of Hitler. Adolf Hitler came into the world on April 20, 1889. His birthplace was the small, almost unremarkable Austrian town of Braunau am Inn, located very close to the border with Germany. From the earliest years, his life was far from idyllic. The family atmosphere was, to put it mildly, unstable, full of hidden and open conflicts. His father, Alois Hitler, was a civil servant, a man who was harsh and authoritarian. He demanded the strictest discipline from his children, yet there were very few displays of paternal love or tenderness in the family. Imagine that home: constant tension, fear of a father who saw his son only as a successor to his bureaucratic career. Alois dreamed that Adolf would follow in his footsteps, becoming another civil servant, a cog in the state machine. In contrast, his mother, Clara Hitler, was a completely different figure. Caring and loving, she seemed to try to soften her husband's severity with her comfort, to create some small island of security and coziness for Adolf and his siblings. She was the person that young Adolf likely turned to in search of consolation. Hitler's relationship with his father was, without exaggeration, difficult. There were constant arguments and misunderstandings. Alois insisted on a career as a civil servant, but young Adolf dreamed of something else. He saw himself as an artist. He was drawn to the bohemian life, to the world of art. This gulf between the wishes of father and son grew with each passing year. The death of Alois in 1903, however cynical it may sound, became a kind of relief for the young Hitler. He felt more freedom to follow his own interests, his own dreams. And here is what is important to note. Despite this turbulent, restless home atmosphere, there is no evidence that Hitler harbored any anti-Semitic feelings in childhood. Jews in his environment, if there were any, did not elicit any special reaction from him. He was a typical average student who, however, showed a lively interest in history and art. It is true that his school performance began to decline in adolescence, especially after the family moved to Linz. It was during this time that he began to be fascinated by the figures of German historical personalities. A kind of romantic, idealized nationalism was budding in his soul. He dreamed of some great future for the German people, not yet understanding what this would lead to: the beginning of the 20th century. Hitler, now a young man, moved to Vienna. Vienna was the capital of the vast, multinational Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was a city of opportunities, a city of contrasts. Hitler's goal was to enter the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts. He was confident in his talent, but disappointment awaited him. Twice, in 1907 and 1908, the Academy rejected him. The verdict was harsh. His talent was not enough to become a professional artist. Can you imagine what a blow this was? The collapse of a dream. The entire life he had envisioned for himself crumbled to dust. This frustration, this feeling of failure, left the deepest mark on his soul. Without any concrete prospects, without support, Hitler began to lead a rather miserable existence in Vienna. He survived on odd jobs, selling his watercolors just to get by. He lived in homeless shelters, spent time in cheap coffee houses and libraries. And it was there, in that environment of the humiliated and the offended, that he began to absorb, like a sponge, nationalistic slogans and extremist ideologies. Vienna at that time was an incredibly cosmopolitan, bustling city. It had enormous ethnic and cultural diversity, and of course, a significant Jewish community. Against the backdrop of escalating social and political problems, this visible Jewish life became a convenient target for many. Anti-Semitic sentiment in Viennese society grew rapidly. Hitler, immersed in this atmosphere, fell under the influence of people who used hatred of Jews as a political tool. One of the main examples was Karl Lueger, the mayor of Vienna, a man who openly used anti-Semitic rhetoric to gain popularity. Besides him, there were many writers and theoreticians who promoted hateful, ultranationalistic ideas. All of this began to shape the worldview of the young, frustrated Hitler. He started to link Jews with economic difficulties and with social problems. An ugly picture was forming in his mind. The Jews were the culprits behind the decline of society. They were supposedly corrupting German values. The impact of these ideas was further exacerbated when Hitler went to war as a soldier in the First World War. In 1914, he volunteered for the German army. He served as a dispatch runner on the Western Front and was even decorated for bravery. But the war turned into a catastrophe for Germany. After long years of bloody fighting, Germany was defeated in 1918. For Hitler, as for many other soldiers, this defeat was a terrible trauma. And immediately, the so-called legend of the stab in the back was born and began to gain strength. The idea was that Germany had not lost the war on the battlefield. It had been betrayed from within by Jews, communists, and other internal enemies. This myth found fertile ground in Hitler's consciousness. It further strengthened his hatred of Jews, deepening his conviction that some kind of national revival and purification was necessary. The signing of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 only added fuel to the fire. This treaty imposed the heaviest sanctions on Germany: massive territorial losses, strict military restrictions, and unbearable financial reparations. For Hitler, these terms were not just unfair, they were an unbearable humiliation, a betrayal of the German people, and he increasingly blamed the Jews and socialists for Germany's collapse. His desire for revenge, his drive to find a political movement capable of restoring the nation's greatness, became ever stronger. Returning to civilian life, Hitler did not stay out of politics. He quickly found common ground with various nationalistic groups. And in 1919, he joined the German Workers' Party, which would later transform, under his influence, into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, or simply, the Nazi Party. His oratorical abilities, his skill in igniting a crowd and mobilizing the masses, quickly set him apart from the other party members. He rose higher and higher, and soon became the sole leader of the movement. In the following years, he began to formulate his ideology more clearly and openly. It was a potent mixture of ultranationalism, calls for a strong hand, and of course, ferocious, visceral anti-Semitic rhetoric. The belief in the supremacy of the so-called Aryan race became one of the cornerstones of Nazism. Hitler argued that the German people must be racially pure, free from any corrupting influences. And the primary such influence, in his opinion, was the Jews. They were portrayed as internal enemies, allegedly responsible for economic crises, cultural degeneration, and political instability. This hatred was not just Hitler's personal obsession. It was woven into the very ideological fabric of Nazism. Nazi propaganda played a central role in spreading these views. Newspapers, radio, public speeches, everything worked to portray the Jews as an existential threat to Germany. In 1925, Hitler fully set out his ideas in the book Mein Kampf, My Struggle. In this book, he presented his vision of the world, his plans for Germany. He emphasized the need for authoritarian rule, territorial expansion to conquer so-called living space, Lebensraum, and of course, the eradication of Jewish influence in society. The economic crisis that swept through Germany in the 1920s and was exacerbated by the Great Depression of 1929 created the perfect condition for his ideas to spread. Desperate people, looking for simple solutions and culprits, heard his calls. Gradually, Hitler gained more and more followers, paving his way to power and to the subsequent realization of his extremist, misanthropic ideology. Hitler's path, marked by personal failures, deep resentments, and the influence of radical ideologies, contributed to the formation of one of the darkest periods in human history. His speeches resonated in a society weakened by crises and led to the rise of the Third Reich, a regime that would plunge the world into a destructive war and orchestrate a genocide on an unprecedented scale. As we will see later in our story, are you interested in such a detailed analysis of historical events? If so, write the phrase, "I want more stories like this," in the comments. By doing this, you will not only inspire us to create new content, but also help our channel grow. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, click the bell to not miss new episodes, and give a like. That way, YouTube will recommend our videos to you more often. Done all that? Then we return to our topic. The beginning of the Holocaust, 1933. Adolf Hitler takes office as Chancellor of Germany. Just a year later, he would combine this post with the presidency and receive the title of Führer, or leader. This is effectively how one of the darkest periods for the Jewish people began. As expected, Hitler proved himself to be a true dictator. And very soon, he began to persecute his political opponents and the ethnic groups he considered inferior. From the very first years of the Nazi regime, Adolf Hitler's government created an extensive system of concentration camps. Initially, in their early stage, they served mainly as places of imprisonment for political opponents, dissidents, and nonconformists, all those whom the state considered undesirable elements. However, as the Second World War developed and Nazi policy radicalized, these camps began to play a central, terrifying role in the systematic persecution of Jews, Roma people, communists, the Polish intelligentsia, Soviet prisoners of war, and other minorities. It is important to understand that although the mortality rate in these places was extremely high-reaching, approximately 50%, the concentration camps were not initially conceived as centers of mass extermination. This, however, changed drastically starting in 1941, when the so-called final solution to the Jewish question was adopted and began to be implemented. From 1942, the Nazis built 6 massive extermination camps in occupied Poland. These camps were specifically designed for killing on an industrial scale. Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Bełżec, Chełmno, Majdanek. These names became symbols of inhuman cruelty. They used gas chambers, mass shootings, and other savage execution methods to wipe out millions of people. The overwhelming majority of them were Jews. Unlike traditional concentration camps, where prisoners were subjected to forced labor and inhuman conditions that slowly led to death, the extermination camps operated with the efficiency of an assembly line. Their purpose was the immediate liquidation of enormous masses of victims. After the invasion of Poland in 1939 and the subsequent occupation of a significant part of Eastern Europe, the network of Nazi camps began to expand rapidly. Historians estimate that the Germans created about 15,000 camps in their branches, or sub-camps, in the occupied territories. Most of them were located in Eastern Europe, where a significant number of the Jewish population lived. New camps were strategically built in areas with a high concentration of Jews, as well as where entire communities of Poles, intellectuals, communists, and Roma people resided. Even within Germany itself, camps were created to accommodate the ever-growing number of prisoners who were captured, deported, and forced to endure unbearable, cruel conditions. The transport of prisoners was carried out under monstrous conditions. Deportees were packed into freight cars like cattle, with no ventilation, no food, and no water. Many died from exhaustion, starvation, or suffocation even before reaching their destination. Those who survived this hell on wheels were often subjected to a so-called selection immediately upon arrival at the camps. The weakest, the sick, the elderly, and the children were mercilessly sent straight to the gas chambers or shot on the spot. Those who were deemed fit for labor faced a different but no less terrible fate. A routine of forced labor, constant hunger, cold, and never-ending violence. The policy of extermination through labor, Vernichtung durch Arbeit, was a deliberate method of annihilation used by the Nazis. Prisoners were required to perform grueling work for 12 to 14 hours a day, often in wartime production, for example, in the manufacture of V-2 rockets, which Nazi Germany used in the war. They labored in mines, arms factories, and on the construction of infrastructure, often without any suitable equipment or basic safety measures. When people reached an extreme state of exhaustion, they were simply disposed of, sent to gas chambers, driven into gas vans, trucks equipped as mobile gas chambers, or simply executed by firing squad. To control and list the prisoners, some concentration camps, such as Auschwitz, introduced a system of number tattoos. This was another method of dehumanization. Upon arrival, prisoners went through humiliating registration procedures. Their hair was shaved, personal belongings and clothing were taken away, and replaced with a striped uniform. After this, those deemed fit were sent to long shifts of slave labor, often in extreme temperatures, under the constant surveillance of SS guards. And even after these grueling work shifts, they were subjected to endless roll calls and checks that could last for hours. During these inspections, it was common for prisoners who fainted from hunger or cold to simply be left lying where they fell, condemned to death. The Nazi camps became a symbol of the terror and cruelty of the Holocaust, a place where millions of lives were destroyed. Even when the Allied forces were advancing in the final stage of the war, the Nazis desperately tried to conceal their atrocities. They dismantled gas chambers and burned documents. However, the horrors experienced by the survivors and documented by the liberating forces revealed to the world the unimaginable scale of the crimes committed. The system of Nazi concentration and extermination camps remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. It is an eternal reminder of the extreme consequences of hatred, racism, and intolerance. The consequences of the Holocaust. The impact of the Holocaust was profound and comprehensive. It left indelible scars on society, both in Europe and throughout the rest of the world. Its effects extended far beyond the enormous human losses. They influenced philosophical and theological debates, artistic expressions, and global political decisions. The question of the fate of the survivors became one of the biggest problems of the post-war period, and it directly contributed to the process of creating the State of Israel. Just think, the forced displacement of the Jewish population, their desperate need for a safe haven for those who had lost absolutely everything. All of this pushed the world community toward this decision. The Nazi genocide left behind millions of refugees. Many of them no longer had homes to return to. Entire communities were devastated, and the few survivors often faced hostility and persistent anti-Semitism in their home countries. Initially, the Allies planned to repatriate these displaced persons, but in the face of ruined cities and the resistance of the survivors themselves, who were unwilling or unable to return to the places where their loved ones were killed, this decision proved unviable. As a result, about 250,000 Jews remained in refugee camps for years, awaiting their unknown fate. Immigration to Western countries such as the United States and Canada remained extremely limited. This led many survivors to view Palestine as the most realistic place for a new life. However, the region was under British mandate, and the British imposed strict barriers to Jewish migration due to opposition from the local Arab population. Despite these difficulties, underground migration networks were organized. This was carried out by former Jewish partisans and resistance fighters in Europe, as well as the Haganah organization in Palestine. These efforts were named the Brecha, the Escape. And despite British restrictions, they managed to transport approximately 20,500 Jews to Palestinian territory. With the end of the British Mandate and the subsequent creation of the State of Israel in 1948, many of these refugees finally found their home in the new state. Additionally, about 80,000 survivors were accepted by the United States. 13,600 settled in Israel, and another 20,000 emigrated to countries like Canada and South Africa. In 1952, the last camps for Jewish refugees were officially closed, concluding this painful chapter of post-war history. The devastation caused by the Holocaust was not limited only to the loss of life, it deeply affected Jewish culture. Before the Second World War, Yiddish was spoken by a community numbering approximately 11 to 13 million people. In the years leading up to the conflict, this language gained recognition as a symbol of Jewish identity in Europe. There was a flourishing of literature, theater, and the press in Yiddish, especially in Poland. However, with the Nazi persecution and the extermination of about 5 million Yiddish speakers, approximately 85% of the Holocaust victims, this culture was practically annihilated on the European continent. The systematic killing of entire communities led to the collapse of Yiddish as a language of international significance, jeopardizing its continuity as a unifying factor for the Jewish diaspora. The scale of the Holocaust also provokes deep reflection in the field of theology. This event forced many scholars and religious figures to question the goodness and justice of divine providence, to re-examine ancient concepts about the role of God in the world. The so-called Holocaust theology emerged as an attempt to understand the extreme suffering endured by the Jewish people. Within Orthodox Judaism, some currents interpreted the tragedy as divine punishment. Others completely rejected this view, arguing that no theological explanation could justify such cruelty. For many, the Holocaust became an unprecedented challenge to faith, leading to a spiritual crisis whose echo is heard to this day. In the field of art and literature, the influence of the Holocaust was no less profound. The philosopher Theodor Adorno expressed this pain by stating that writing poetry after Auschwitz was barbaric. However, the need to bear witness to the horrors experienced gave rise to extensive literary and artistic creation, both by survivors and by writers and filmmakers of subsequent generations. Among the most impressive works are the accounts of Elie Wiesel, Night, Primo Levi, If This Is a Man, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, and of course, The Diary of Anne Frank, one of the most emblematic documents of Jewish suffering during the Nazi period. Poetry also became a means of expression, as for example, in Paul Celan's poem, Todesfuge, Death Fugue, which was a direct response to Adorno's reflection on art after the Holocaust. In cinema, the Holocaust inspired the creation of many works that helped to enlighten the public and preserve the memory of the tragedy. Films such as Schindler's List, The Pianist, and Life is Beautiful gained worldwide recognition, telling moving stories of resistance, suffering, and survival amid genocide. Over time, as the generation of survivors ages, initiatives aimed at preserving the memory of the Holocaust become increasingly important. Projects like the Survivors of the Shoah Foundation, established by Steven Spielberg, and documentaries such as Claude Lanzmann's Shoah seek to record the testimonies of those who lived through this dark period of history. In addition, institutions dedicated to the study and preservation of the memory of the Holocaust have been established all over the world, such as Yad Vashem in Israel and the Holocaust Memorial Museum in the USA. The UN proclaimed January 27 as the International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust, so that future generations will never forget the atrocities committed. The Holocaust did not merely destroy millions of lives. It changed the course of history, leaving a legacy of pain, reflection, and the constant need to fight against hatred and intolerance. What do you think of today's episode? Share your opinion in the comments. The Second World War is full of incredible stories in every sense of the word, but few of them are as impressive as the story of Audie Murphy. He was one of the greatest heroes in the fight against the Nazis, but also became one of Hollywood's biggest stars in the 1950s and 60s. How did all this become possible? Interested? Then click on the video that has now appeared on your screen in the recommendations to find out the whole incredible story of Audie Murphy. Thank you for watching, and until next time.